Funding for the Hinckley Report is made possible in part by the George S. and Dolores Story Eccles Foundation and the Cleone Peterson Eccles Endowment Fund.
Tonight on the Hinckley Report, Utah's legislature is nearing the final stretch, and there is no shortage of controversial issues. From DUIs to the death penalty, how are the battle lines being drawn? What do voters have to say about these issues? And the fight for government funding heats up as new revenue numbers are released. The race for Utah's Senate seat is already in full swing, and politicians nationwide are weighing in. What are the latest developments? How are Utah voters responding? And the nation continues to grapple with tough issues. How will the debate affect Utah? Good evening, and welcome to the Hinckley Report. I'm Jason Perry, director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics. Covering the week, we have Heidi Hatch, anchor with KUTV News, Glenn Beebe, political reporter with ABC4 Utah, and Matt Canham, senior managing editor of the Salt Lake Tribune. So glad to have you all with us today. Can we start talking about the legislature? We've got 2 weeks left of the legislative session. All the interesting stuff is coming out here at the end. Matt, let's start with a couple of the controversial things that are coming up. One, we're talking about using firearms for self-defense even if you are legally intoxicated. This is House Bill 328.
Right.
Give us some background on this one.
So this is actually output from a bill from last year that lowered the blood alcohol level from 0.08 to 0.05. We'd be the first in the nation that did that, and that would kick in December of this year. And what happens though is when you define what is under the influence of alcohol, it can have consequences. And that cascaded to gun rights, where you can't fire a weapon under the influence of alcohol. It's a misdemeanor. But now that dropped from 0.08 to 0.05, essentially 2 drinks, and if you use a gun even in self-defense, you committed a crime. So they're now trying to fix that. But the people who are against that blood alcohol bill that went from 0.08 to 0.05 are saying this is hypocrisy. If you could shoot a gun at 0.05, you can't drive a car?
So Heidi, Senator Jim DeBacchus had an interesting way of proving this point this
Two
week.
mimosas? Yes. I think we're going to miss Jim when he's not in the legislature because he has a great way of storytelling, and he seemed to sell his point fairly well. He did a good job with his 2 mimosas, although I do wonder how much orange juice and how much alcohol he was trading off in there, and how much, I don't know. There's a lot of argument as to whether or not a man of his size when they had 2 drinks would be at the legal limit. So I don't know. It's a tough one, but he definitely made a point up there yesterday.
Yes, he did, making sure he went in letting everyone know, I'm at 0.05 is what he said, and seemed to be functioning.
And I think the thing with this is that, you know, the restaurant industry is trying to, I think, use the gun bill as a way to bring it up, as you were mentioning, that what they're calling hypocrisy. But I think when you talk to the restaurant industry now, that some people already assume that it's in place, even though it doesn't hit till the end of this year. Their point in talking with us now is more that they don't want to be the first state. They don't mind if nearby states have it. They don't mind if it drops that low and everybody follows it, but they don't want to be the first.
Well, how does that play with their analysis? And really, this is the bill. It's Senate Bill 210. Unless we have 3 other states that drop theirs to 0.05, ours won't go there. That's the idea, right? Does that make it?
Someone's got to be first, though, and I think that we probably won't be the last because there's a lot of research coming out. It's sort of like whether or not coffee is good for you or whether it's bad for you. It seems like there's new numbers coming out in both directions. But I think one state, whether it's us or someone else, others will follow suit.
And Representative Thurston, I talked with him about it this week. You know, I think he kind of feels vindicated because he came out with that. He got a lot of criticism, but then the National Academy of Sciences came out and said that it should be dropped to 0.05. The National Highway Safety Board has said for a while that it should be 0.05. So I think Utah is going to be the first, but I think unlike when we dropped to 0.08, I think more states are going to follow suit faster to go down to 0.05.
Okay, because we're at, go ahead.
I was just going to say, just to clarify, there are states that have a 0.05, but it's a difference in the penalties. We're making it a full DUI at 0.05. There are states like Colorado and New York where you get a enhanced ticket for between 0.05 and 0.08. And that's part of the reason this thing, when it passed last year, is delayed until December of this year. they were kind of hoping another state would come on board so we wouldn't be weird and have another weird liquor law, because there is some perception that Utah is sometimes out of step with other states when it comes to alcohol policy. The governor also was interested in trying to tweak this in some way, but recently he said this is going to be the law of the land. We're going to stick with it. So we'll see how this actually plays out in December.
Okay. The governor weighed in on another interesting issue, which has been something different for Republicans. That's the death penalty.
Yes.
Just this last week, we've had a major piece of legislation with support, the House and the Senate, to abolish it altogether. Glenn, I know that you are following this a little bit. What is the rationale, and why have the Republicans come around on this one?
Well, I think you see so many other states getting rid of it because of the high cost of it. If you actually look at the cost analysis, it is so much more expensive to kill someone with the death penalty than it is to just keep them in jail for life. And I think when you see other states getting rid of it, hasn't been a negative effect. And I think there's always that worry, too, that what happens if you accidentally kill an innocent person, and when you see the amount of people who have been exonerated off of death row. So I think for a lot of people it just makes fiscal sense, and also when you see other countries that don't have it, it just kind of also makes kind of a moral sense.
Heidi, and the people you're talking to, do those arguments carry the day? It's really about cost savings and maybe the chance that we would get it wrong?
I think it does. I think that those really are the sentiments you hear from people, that there's always the worry that there could be that person you put to death that shouldn't be. Financially, I think a lot of people say it makes sense. The only concern I'm hearing is that maybe they are moving too quickly and they're not hearing from enough families, because you do want to take into account these families that have been through horrific crimes. And oftentimes, I think they're re-victimized through the process of appeals and appeals for years. So maybe when they sit down and talk to them, they'll find that they're on the same boat too. But when you have a short legislative session like we do, I think it's tough to dig in deep to these topics and make sure you're getting it right as you do it.
And I think another argument that people use sometimes who may be against that is if you have the death penalty, you can sometimes stop the appeals process over and over by getting someone to plead guilty. There have been several cases where, Gary Ridgway, for example, the Green River Killer in Washington State, did not want the death penalty. And so he said, if you don't give me the death penalty, I'll just plead guilty. And I think some people want the power still to do that.
So interesting. The governor even indicating he may be willing to sign this bill.
Though the Salt Lake Tribune and the Hinckley Institute have polled this question before, and the death penalty is still very popular among voters. The idea that you can have an ultimate punishment. One thing that I think is actually persuading some Republicans, and it's more of a libertarian viewpoint, is that there's a lot of conservatives in Utah don't trust government action, think that bureaucrats aren't great at doing things, and think that the power should be with the people. But we give the government the ultimate power to kill somebody, and that goes against their philosophy in some areas. So there are some conservatives who just think that government shouldn't have that ability.
Let's talk about abilities of some in the industry. We're going to have to get to you, Glenn and Heidi, for just a moment. So this non-compete bill is just getting hotter. We started talking about this on the show a little while ago, but it's coming, right? And it's just for you two.
It is
for people
coming.
in the broadcast world, restricting the ability to put you on non-competes.
I'll let you go first.
Well, I think one of the things about this bill is that it has brought to the forefront the issues we face in the industry. And a lot of our management has talked about this on the Hill. You've seen some ex-employees talk about it. But I think when you look at it as a whole in our industry, it's been a problem, because one of the things that I think our industry is facing is that the young reporters of today are not becoming the seasoned journalists of tomorrow, and part of that has to do with non-competes. And so I don't know any industry where it's better off when you have less experienced people. And so I think this bill is kind of addressing that problem in our industry.
Yeah, and one of my biggest concerns inside the newsroom, and I know that my bosses feel passionately in one direction and many in the opposite direction, but we have a lot of young producers that come in oftentimes not long after college, and they're stuck with these non-competes themselves, making very little money. And when there's not the opportunity for growth, and you know that you have this non-compete, you can't wait out a year, it makes it difficult for them and for anyone to negotiate a higher salary, because there's no incentive for that negotiation. And then, I mean, I don't really want to take a stance, but you look a lot of people like myself. I'm the breadwinner in my family. My husband's the stay-at-home dad, and you can't just switch that at the last second if for some reason it doesn't work out at your place of employment, whether they want to keep you or otherwise. A year is a long time to go without a salary. Yeah.
Well, what is the strategy for the news stations or for the broadcasters now, and how to approach this? We're hearing reports that maybe they're saying don't even cover these stories. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what we're hearing.
My bosses spoke about it yesterday. yesterday, and they said now that it's cleared the House that they will be there on the Senate floor and listening to the hearings that go on there. They said that they're fine with people tweeting about it and talking about it, but if there's anyone with overt viewpoints, that likely that's not going to be the person who's covering it on the news. And that's the hard part. If it's a topic that you are involved in and you're giving your own viewpoints, it's very difficult to remain unbiased while reporting on it.
And that is a tough part because, you know, as a journalist, you're supposed to not take a side either way on an issue, but this is an issue that affects a lot of us in the business, and for some of us, we have, you know, been the victims of these non-competes in other markets. So it's a tough thing to not cover, but as far as being told not to cover it, I haven't heard that at our station, but it's kind of tough too because when do you cover a bill? You cover it when it's usually in a hearing or on the floor, and for right now, it's been talked about a lot, but it hasn't gotten to that process yet in the Senate. So it's possible we could see some coverage down the line.
Okay, well, it's nice seeing you all on the Hill anyway, I'll tell you that. It's been nice. Matt, one thing is interesting about the legislative session this year is they have a ton of money.
A ton of money.
It's just so interesting. I've heard legislators say it's harder to have a session when you have a lot than when you don't have any. Because it's easy to say no, but now they got to pick. So $581 million of new revenue to the state coming for this next year. Talk about the politics of that and what they're doing now.
So there's some tax implications, but also a lot of this is probably going to go to schools, and it probably should. The way we set it up in Utah is the income tax collections are earmarked for schools, and a lot of this money is from income tax. And so this comes at an interesting time because there's a ballot initiative pushed by some prominent civic leaders in this state to raise taxes to pay for schools because they feel our schools are underfunded. And the legislature has tried to figure out a way to stop that initiative from going forward. Lawmakers do not like it when other people try to do their jobs of making laws through the ballot initiative process. So the question is, will this amount of money appease that group? Is there something they can do with this cash? And the interesting part, as you said, it's like $500 million. It doesn't even count the state's windfall from the federal tax bill, which is an additional $80 million on top. So there are a lot of building projects, there's a lot of road projects that are looking for money, but the bulk of this will go to schools. The other thing is lawmakers will say it's hard no matter what, right? Doing the budget's hard. The bad years are hard. There's no way to say like cutting money is the easier part than spending money. I don't think any person in the world believes that's the case. But they also are a little worried because they wonder if our economy is starting to overheat a bit. The last time we had this much money was right before the Great Recession. And there's a question of, you know, do we sock some of this away just in case this starts to turn bad in years to come?
That's right. Glenn, so what are you hearing? Are they going to sock it away? Because there will be a time they love their rainy day fund, and they've used it in the past during the recession with some great effect.
Well, I think you're hearing all of it. You're hearing let's spend on education and roads. We need that money. You're hearing let's sock it away, but you're also hearing let's maybe give it back as a tax break, and that's a popular thing as well. But it kind of depends because a lot of people on the Hill are fiscal conservatives. But what's your definition of that? Is your definition of a fiscal conservative, you know, having taxes as low as possible to try to stimulate growth, or is it being good with the money you have, socking it away, and then because you know that there's going to be times where it's either you don't have that in the budget or you're going to have big projects that you'd like to pay for. And I think the state has always been good about their rainy day fund. So we know that there's big projects coming down the line. Do they sock it away and save for it?
Heidi, help us understand these two arguments because this is so interesting what you both have just said, right? We could buy off the initiative maybe, right? By putting enough money in education or some tax breaks. How do they navigate this? Because those are interesting possibilities.
I think we all like tax breaks, but I think it takes money to make money. And whether you're looking at investing in properties or investing in your state, I think that if they were to stop and really talk to people about where they would want to invest, that money really needs to go to education. Because when you talk to people, even though they always want a tax break, people want smaller class sizes. They want teachers to be paid well. They want to make sure their schools are safe. They want to make sure there's enough counselors, and we don't have enough of those. So maybe that is your rainy day fund, that you're investing in your schools so that these kids are well educated, well cared for, mentally well, so when they enter the job market, they're doing a good job. It's definitely a long-term investment, but in the long run, I think it would be good for the state if they did move some of that money in that direction.
One thing they're talking about with teachers is actually raising the base pay by $1,000 or maybe even $2,000. Utah, like a lot of states, faces a teacher shortage. And so this is one of those where you talked about it might be an investment because you actually need teachers in the classroom if we're going to, help our kids.
Yeah. Okay, we have to talk about a big meeting that's happening this week with the Republican Party Central Committee. A proposal is on the table. They've called themselves into a meeting to discuss what some are calling, Matt, we'll start with you to describe this, a purity test for Republican candidates or Republicans generally.
Right. So we have two ways to get to the primary ballot. You can go through the caucus convention system or you can get signatures. And the party insiders who are on this committee really don't like the signature route. They think that bypasses the party's authority, and they have tried to fight this over and over again. So they have, right now, they're trying to vote on an idea that if you get on the ballot only by signatures, you can't call yourself a Republican anymore. And that's targeting people like Mitt Romney and Representative Mia Love, who have promised to go both the signature route and the convention route. But if they lose in convention and still get on with signatures, they wouldn't be labeled as a Republican anymore.
Yeah. And my question is, who does this help? How does a purity test in either party help anyone? Because both Democrats and Republicans claim to be big tent parties. But if you're going to be having purity tests, how does that make everyone feel welcome? And when it comes to whether you take the signature route or not, we can still have a debate on that. But I think when you look at the Curtis race, it obviously showed that there's some flaws in that system. The fact that Curtis went the signature route, lost at convention, didn't even make it to the finals, and still not only won huge in his primary, but won huge in the general. And so there's something wrong with how we pick our candidates, and we need to figure it out, where we can still, parties can still pick the candidates they want, but that voters feel like they still have a say, because obviously there's a disconnect somewhere.
I think it's gross. Like, why do we need to call it a purity test, first of all? And both parties, I'm sure, would like to rat out the people they would. I mean, look at Hillary Clinton this time around. If she could have given Bernie Sanders a purity test and gotten him off the ballot, I mean, her life would have been so much easier. But is that what we want? Very few people in our states deciding who belongs in which party? Let the voters decide. And I think overall people want to have choices. They can decide if they're pure enough for them. And ultimately, do we really want people to be pure? When you talk to most Americans, they're not far right, they're not far left, they're far more middle and centrist than we want to put them in these elections.
Very good. Very interesting. We'll watch that one closely. Some people who are watching that also are some people you've mentioned already. You mentioned Mia Love is watching that. Let's talk about a poll this week. Mia Love currently leading Ben McAdams 49% to 43%.
Yes, and this is going to be a tight race. She's running against Ben McAdams, who's the Salt Lake County mayor, one of the most prominent, if not the most prominent Democrat in the state at this time. This is going to be a tight race going forward, and it's going to be one that, like pretty much every midterm election, is going to be centered on Donald Trump. Every race is going to be a reaction to him and what's happening in Washington. And I think that this is going to be interesting because Mia Love has been interesting when it's come to Donald Trump's issues. Even last night when we talked to her about the guns in schools, she expressed an openness to increasing the age that people would be allowed to buy an AR-15 and guns like that from 18 to 21, similar to Donald Trump. But she's opposed him on issues like DACA and immigration, where he's taken a harder line approach than she would. So how she responds to the president will probably be the central point of a very tight race.
Hey, Heidi, respond to this a little bit, because the quote from Mia yesterday at the Senate was so interesting. I have it. It said, "I don't see the president as the leader of my party. I was not elected by the president." How is she separating this? Because that was a very insightful point.
That's a good question. My problem was she made that statement and then made herself unavailable to cameras, because we'd like to follow up, we'd like to ask more questions. And one problem we've seen with her time in office is that she doesn't make herself very available. And I feel like as the news media, we're that voice for the people to ask them questions, to understand her feeling, where she's coming from. And she's not offering herself up, as I think a lot of people would like to see her, because it's hard to understand and really talk to them about the issues if they'll give a soundbite or give that, but not have a personal conversation about it later.
And I think what's most interesting about the poll you cited is, yes, it's quite a few points, but I think when we've seen polls being so off lately, especially when it came to some of the national races and everyone's watching this race, I think this one's going to be about ground game. It's who can you get out to the polls. I think it is going to be kind of a referendum on Donald Trump and where Mia Love has stood on his issues as well. But what's going to be interesting too is, with so many people seeing this as a national race or a seat that they may be able to turn, I don't think national media or national groups are going to get Utah's brand of politics, that whether it's a Republican issue or a Democrat issue, we kind of don't like outside groups meddling, and we like good politics where people are nice to each other. And so I think what you're going to start seeing here in the next couple months is a lot of attack ads going back and forth, but it's not going to be from the candidates' camps. It's going to be from outside groups.
Well, how do you think she is doing in this approach she's taking on guns? Because she's not with some of the other members of our delegation on this, where she said everything is on the table. Is that the right thing for her for this race, Matt?
Well, I think the hard part is sometimes we look at Utah as just one state, and we're talking about congressional districts, and those congressional districts are different from each other. Mia Love is in the 4th district, which includes the west side of Salt Lake County into the west side of Utah County. So some very conservative areas, but areas that also have different viewpoints. This district dislikes the president more than any other part of our state, but also might be more open to gun regulations than maybe other areas of our state. And so we need to probably do a little bit more reporting, but she might be more in line with her constituents on this issue than, say, a Rob Bishop would be in his district, which has a lot more rural voters.
Glenn, you did an interesting story yesterday about down ballot impacts of Mitt Romney. That's what it was. If people show up for him, what is Mia thinking about that? Is she counting on a little bit of a bump because people are showing up for Mitt Romney?
I think she absolutely is. And I mean, Mitt Romney is very popular. When he ran for president, he got more than 90% of the primary vote, got more than 70% of the general election vote. And I think people are just excited to go put their support behind him in the election. And so I think that can only be good for Republicans. But we also kind of mentioned, too, that, you know, Democrats saw a lot of new voters in their caucuses in 2016, and so I think they're banking on or trying to counter that with getting the new voters who weren't involved in politics until last year into the process and hopefully able to counter Mitt Romney's down ticket appeal.
Okay, I want to talk. Yes.
Oh yeah, I was going to say one thing that was going to play into is that we're seeing a movement after Parkland, Florida. Also, is there's a lot of kids right now who are upset. They want to be a part of this process of voting. They'll turn 18, if not during this school year, in the summertime. And if they register to vote, and people do a good job of registering them, they will be new voices that will be a part of this new midterm election. So they'll play in.
Let me ask. We'll get to Mitt Romney just a little bit more. But one of the issues that came up with Mia Love and others, including the president, is the idea of arming teachers on this gun issue. It came up. It is not going away in terms of this discussion. How are people reacting to that idea?
Well, last night I held a 1-hour town hall talking to different school administrators and teachers about this. We had 8 people on our panel, so it certainly wasn't a poll, but I asked them to raise their hand if they themselves or wanted other people in their schools to be armed. Not one of them raised their hand. They just said, this is not a responsibility we want. We don't feel like it's making our schools safer. On the other hand, earlier in the day, we talked to a gun group that had signed 600 people up since Parkland 8 days ago for classes this weekend for concealed carry. So I think there's very divided viewpoints on this, and Utah is one of about 8 states, I believe, that allow teachers. So whether you know it or not, or have realized this, your teacher may be packing heat in class already.
Yeah, with a concealed weapon permit.
Yeah.
And I think it's just one of those things where, you know, it's tough. You know, some teachers may not want that responsibility, as you said, because, you know, that's not their job, is to be armed. But then again, if a situation like that happens, there's some people who just, you know, they want a fighting chance. But I think it's a tough issue because you never know what you might happen in that situation. You can practice at the range all you want, but when it actually comes, you know, it's tough to know. I mean, we just saw that story about the sheriff's deputy who didn't go in right away, even though that's what they're trained to do. And so, you know, you never know what would happen, but you just hope it really never happens here.
Okay, let's talk about Mitt for just a moment because he's weighing in on this issue, but also want to talk about the endorsement he got this week. All right. So, Matt, was Mitt Romney wanting the endorsement of President Trump?
I'm going to guess he didn't ask the president for that tweet. What an interesting relationship the president and Mitt Romney have, and has had for years. When Mitt was running for president and he got endorsed by Donald Trump, there was a very awkward news conference where Mitt said something to the effect of, you know, never dreamed that this moment would ever happen. Something awkward.
Yeah.
They clearly have criticized each other very strongly. Mitt Romney has called the president a phony and a fraud. The president said Mitt Romney choked like a dog. They have not liked each other. I think this was the president putting a stamp on a candidate who has a very good chance to become the next senator from the state of Utah and inject himself into that race. And I would guess that Mitt Romney would rather not talk about the president or have the president talk about his race at all going forward.
What do you think, Heidi? President just swallowed it, said, this kind of high likelihood, I think I just got to get on board.
I think this is a double-edged sword for both of them. I think they sort of both need each other but don't want each other at the same time as they move forward if they want to accomplish anything. And so maybe it's one of those situations where it's like you keep your friends close and your enemies closer. And so you try to align with each other to some extent. And Mitt Romney has his own crowd who will be voting for them. But there are a lot of people in Utah that did vote for President Trump. So he's towing this strange line between, okay, thank you, but don't talk to me anymore either. So it's just weird because they've both said such nasty things.
They have said some pretty terrible things to each other.
And if you look at Mitt Romney's tweet, the ending of it will, oh, thanks for that, but I kind of need to, I'm hoping to get the support of Utah.
Pivot.
Yeah, total pivot.
is
Like
right.
how many times did he write that tweet and then delete and then rewrite? Yeah.
So I thought it was interesting. It says, thank you, Mr. President, for the support. And now I'm going to try to get the Utah supporters. That's kind of the pivot you're talking about?
Yeah.
I mean, he does want, as you said, there's this awkward line. He's running to be a Republican in the state of Utah. 50% of people in Utah support the president.
Yeah.
He obviously didn't vote for Donald Trump, didn't say nice things about Donald Trump. Donald Trump tried to get Orrin Hatch to run again to block Mitt Romney from running. But there is a reality in the Republican politics where you have to address the fact that this is the president and a big swath of voters support this president.
Yeah.
And he may need, if Mitt Romney does end up winning, he may need him for something down the line.
Yes, he will. So they're just keeping everyone close
Yes.
at the present time. Okay, thank you for your insights on these very important issues. That's it for tonight's show. The conversation continues online at kued.org/Hinckley Report. We'll see you next week. Thank you and good night.